My wife, Juliet, looked stunning, almost irresistible, if she weren't laced with venom. She sauntered toward the boardroom, blending into the crowd of sycophants who claimed to run Egg Mullet. In reality, they were so far removed from the actual work that they'd hit terminal velocity if they ever stooped that low. Juliet was dressed in a meticulously tailored bespoke suit, with a skirt a bit shorter and a top a bit tighter than the typical business attire. But that was Juliet. She knew how to use her slender legs and perfect figure to her advantage in any meeting. Just not for me, her disillusioned, discarded husband. Not anymore. The group of corpulent men and their sleek, efficient assistants filed into the boardroom and fixed their eyes on me, seated at the far end of the long, polished oak table, where Mr. Harry Williams, the all-powerful chairman, usually held court. Flanking me were Miller and Young on one side and Ward on the other. We were the ambush party, the gang of four. Molly, our stenographer, was already scribbling furiously, documenting every word to complement the recording. "Who the hell are you?" demanded Williams, renowned for his blunt, no-nonsense approach to management. "My name is Dylan Wright, gentlemen." My wife's head snapped around at the sound of my voice. She had been chatting with the marketing director, Reuben Walker something or other, and hadn't noticed me until now. She quickly made her way over. "Dylan, what the hell are you doing here?" "Ah, Mrs. Wright," I said cheerfully. "You're the assistant marketing director, aren't you?" She took a moment to process the situation before responding. "Of course I am." "You know that. Now, you need to leave right now." "Why don't you take a seat, Mrs. Wright?" Although I fail to see why an assistant marketing director is needed at a board meeting. Shouldn't you be busy working, rather than taking an extended lunch and attending a meeting with the board? "Dylan," she hissed, "you're embarrassing me. You need to get out of here right now." "I think I'm far too late to embarrass you, Mrs. Wright, and I need to be here right now. So take a seat and let's see how this plays out." "Dylan, we can talk later at home. Now, get out." She had been whispering with a hiss until that moment. Her last words dramatically increased in pitch and volume. Williams interrupted again. "Someone call security and get these idiots out of here. And let them know someone's losing their job once I find out who let them in." Ward spoke up. "An extraordinary meeting of shareholders is now in session, gentlemen. Security is aware of our presence and our right to be here." "Who the hell are you?" demanded Williams. I never realized he was such a smooth talker. Rising from salesman to sales director to chairman by schmoozing, kissing ass, and backstabbing, it's hard to believe he reached his position using such language. He must have let himself go a bit, judging by his belly. "Thomas Ward, senior partner of Ward, and Young." "And who the hell are they?" Williams was on a roll now. "The company auditors." "And you're here because—" "I'm here to ensure the extraordinary shareholders meeting is conducted in accordance with all the rules and regulations of the Companies Act, as amended in 2006 and 2013. Look, I don't know who you jokers are, but whatever you're trying to sell, I'm not buying it. So back off. Get out of my building." "I would remind you, Mr. Williams, that the building is owned by the company, which is in turn owned by the shareholders." "I own the damn shareholders. Now get out, whoever you are, and forbid that idiot from writing it all down." Molly looked up and gave him a sweet smile. Damn, Molly was so pretty, and when she smiled, "Down, boy. Now's not the time." She adjusted her black-framed glasses, pushed a stray lock of dark blonde hair behind her ear, and my stomach did a flip. Man, she was pretty, and those lips. She scribbled busily as Phillips, the CFO, spoke up. "Shareholders' meetings require notification and must be held in a venue that allows all to attend if they wish. This is an extraordinary shareholders' meeting, Mr. Phillips. Molly, could you check if I mentioned that earlier?" "Yes, Mr. Ward. You said, an extraordinary meeting of shareholders is now in session." To which Mr. Williams replied, "Who the hell are you?" "Notices were sent out 2 days ago, gentlemen, as required." "That's nonsense," said Turner, the company secretary. "I haven't received any notification of any such meeting, and I would be the first to know." And yet our records show that the notification by email was received and acknowledged as read. Not by me, it wasn't, he stated smugly. Apparently, you haven't been here for 2 days. I believe you've been on a team-building exercise. Strange that it would take place mid-week, but you make the policies. I make the policies, Williams asserted, and you can back off? If I say it happens mid-week, then that's how it is. Of course you're right, said Ward smoothly. My audit clerks are going through those accounts and receipts for the team-building days right now. I couldn't resist chiming in. Ooh, have you been a bad putty cat? Evans, Williams commanded. Get down there and sort it out. I won't have any randoms wandering in off the street and looking through our financial papers. I noticed that Oscar Evans, the chief financial officer, looked a bit pale. You all right, Oscar? You look a little under the weather. I'm sure the team-building exercise was conducted properly, not just an excuse to stay in a 5-star hotel, get drunk, and have fun with your assistants. Dallin, Miller put his hand on my arm. What? I protested. I said I was sure it wasn't an excuse for that. He gave me an old-fashioned look. As the legal mind of the group, he had every right to. Mr. Williams, said Ward in his smooth, polished manner that reminded me of Kobayashi from Asterisk, the usual suspects Asterisk. You might want to keep Mr. Evans on hand for the meeting. According to the share register, he owns significant shares and may wish to vote. He votes how I tell him to vote, Williams declared, brooking no argument. The board members and their assistants were still gathered at the far end of the table. Gentlemen, Ward said, please have a seat so we can get to the first order of business on the agenda. There is no goddamn agenda, shouted Williams. I have the agenda right here, I said, pushing a piece of paper forward. I was glad now that Molly had talked me out of writing it in purple crayon, which had been my first instinct, considering how much of a joke this place was. I didn't get an agenda. This meeting is not valid or legal, protested Turner. I nodded to Molly. She pulled her phone from some mysterious place on her seemingly magical body. It had to be magic, given that her clothes looked like she had been dipped in liquid silk. They fit that closely. There were no visible pockets or places to hide a phone. Trust me, I checked. She murmured into the phone, then made it vanish and nodded to us. Williams was still grumbling and threatening to throw us out, but I noticed the urgency had left his warnings. A minute later, a young man in an expensive suit appeared, carrying a laptop. More. If you would open it, Mr. Turner will enter his password. The man opened the laptop and placed it in front of the skinny company secretary, who stared at it, stretched out his hand to the keyboard, and then paused. Mr. Turner, said Miller, I suggest you refrain from doing anything foolish. Mr. Moore would be obliged to prevent that, which could be unfortunate. Everyone in the room suddenly became acutely aware that Mr. Moore was much more menacing than an audit clerk should be, all without moving a muscle. It was quite impressive. Turner entered his password and opened his emails. When he went a little paler and began to sweat, I knew he'd found the notice. The notification was also posted on the company bulletin board as required and in the national newspapers. Not that it was strictly necessary, as we also have written agreement to short notice. Sure, here's the rewritten version. The email was fake. A friend of mine had tampered with it, making the date and time appear to be 2 days ago instead of 2 hours ago, and also making it seem as if it had been read and acknowledged. Don't ask me how, I just have resourceful friends. However, the notice board posting and the newspaper ad were real. I should have mentioned that the ad was quite small and placed among the classified ads on the back page of a newspaper with the smallest circulation we could find, definitely not one that business people typically read. The notice board was in the canteen of a small branch of the company in Scotland. It took some serious thinking to come up with that one. It was pushing the limits, but it was legal. Ward tapped the table. All right, gentlemen, if you're ready, we can begin. Mr. Wright, would you please read the first item on the agenda? I stood up, adjusted my jacket, and fastened the lowest button. My suit was cheap, but it looked like the more expensive ones. I then adjusted my tie and cleared my throat. All eyes were on me, even Juliet's, though she seemed furious and reluctant to look at me. Thank you, Mr. Ward. Gentlemen, the first item on the agenda is a motion of no confidence in the board of this company and the immediate replacement of all board members. There was a moment of silence before chaos erupted, reminiscent of a bar during a cup final game. Some were laughing uproariously, others were roaring angrily, and some were squealing in disbelief. It was more like a scene from Animal Farm. My wife looked so embarrassed by my behavior that she couldn't even glance in my direction. She was slumped in her seat, trying to make herself as inconspicuous as possible. Any discussion of item 1, gentlemen? What's to discuss? Roared Williams, staring directly at me. I know you. Your Wright's shit-shoveling husband, the bricklayer. Maybe instead of just using your muscles, you should have used your brain and taken some advice from her. She knows what she's doing, and she's really good at it too. He waggled his eyebrows suggestively as he looked around the room, and his colleagues followed suit, smirking at Juliet and me. If her affair had been a secret before, it wasn't anymore. She was exposed. Red-faced and on the verge of tears, she shrank even lower in her chair. You idiots may have set this up, but you clearly have no idea how a business works. This is a limited company with shares sold on the stock market, not some turkey farm out past the M25. You don't get any say in the running of this business, my business. Now be a good boy and back off. Get out of my face. Your talk of agendas was amusing at first, but now you're just pissing me off. Ward didn't flinch. Any other discussion on the first item on the agenda? When all he got were sneers and laughter from the 12 board members and snickers and disdain from the assistants behind them, he held his silence for a moment. Then let's proceed with the vote on the motion that all the board members of Acme Limited be dismissed and replaced immediately. All in favor? I raised my hand. William sneered. You? Do you even have shares? I nodded, and Juliet looked at me in shock. How many? Williams asked. 100 shares, I replied, bought and paid for. Juliet looked down at her lap again, the humiliation of being associated with me evident. 100 shares amounted to less than 1/100%. I was the village idiot at the country's finest university, compared to the businessmen she interacted with daily. She was an eager acolyte learning from the masters, while I wasn't even smart enough to clean up after them. I saw her slip her wedding ring off her finger and put it in her pocket. It didn't make me sad, just surprised at how little I cared. Molly smiled at me, and I wrinkled my nose at her playfully. She liked that, and her smile grew wider. Williams burst into laughter. 100 shares. What's that worth? £2. Ward continued calmly, those against the motion. The laughter persisted. If there are no votes against. Phillips suddenly sobered. I vote against. What? Williams guffawed, wiping his eyes. Are you serious? The vote was about to go against us. He voted his 100 shares, and no one was opposing him. Williams quickly sobered up and stared at me, his bushy eyebrows furrowed in a frown. You sneaky little rat, you orchestrated the entire scheme. This was your plan all along, and you nearly trapped us, laughing the whole way. Very clever. Well, I own 83 million shares, and I vote against this proposal. Now get out of here and take your lackeys with you. If you ever set foot in this building again, I'll have you locked up so tight you'll squeak every time you breathe. A small forest of hands went up, voting against the motion. Things were looking grim for the opposing team. Ward carefully noted each vote, cross-referencing them with the share register to determine the number of shares each voter held. That brings us to a total of just under 242 million shares against the proposal. With 27.62% of all issued shares voting against, the proposal is accepted. Get out of my building, you piece of... What do you mean, accepted? Turner stood up, shouting at Ward. Wait, what? Gasped Williams. I thought he meant rejected. No, Mr. Williams. I was clear. The motion has passed. The room erupted with protests and denials, replacing the previous laughter and jeering. Listen, Warrington, or whatever your name is, you can't just declare something and make it true. Of course not, Mr. Williams. I'm well versed in business procedure, better than any of you. In fact, I know exactly what I'm saying. Good, then speak plainly, because right now you're talking out of your ass, you bastard. Mr. Williams, the numbers are straightforward. 27.62% of the shares, those owned by the people at this table, voted to reject the motion. Meanwhile, 58.98% of the shares voted to accept it. Therefore, the motion is passed. I can't make it any simpler. What? Williams retorted. How do you get 58% out of 100 shares? You don't, Mr. Williams. You wouldn't even get 1% out of 100 shares in this context. Remember, this is a public company traded on the stock exchange. There are nearly 1 billion shares in total. So where does the 58% come from? I stood up again. It comes from proxies, Mr. Williams. These proxies allow me to exercise the voting rights of other shareholders. I've used them to vote all of you corrupt, deceitful individuals out, and I just succeeded. Juliet was now staring at me with wide-eyed bewilderment. How on earth did I know about something like proxies? I was a builder, not a financier. Where would I have even heard the term? Williams was also staring at me in shock. You can't have that many proxies. It's impossible. Ah, but I do, Williams. I simply asked for them, and they were entrusted to me. Just for this one meeting. For one day. That would have cost you millions. No, it was about knowing whom to talk to. And truth be told, most of them really don't like you. It had taken weeks of effort. Ever since I had overheard 2 board members conversing in the executive restrooms while I was up in the ceiling hunting down a leak. Juliet had arranged the job as a way to assuage her guilt, I suppose. That right bitch is so fine, one of them said. I believe it was Baker, the sales director. There's only one Wright in this town who fits that description, so I knew exactly who they were talking about. Besides, the fact that she worked just 1 floor down made it obvious. You think Williams is going to share her ass at the next team building event? Asked the other board member, likely Juliet's immediate boss. He likes to keep her under his wing, where he can sleep with her to his heart's content. Although it's been over 2 years, so maybe he's already tired of her. Perhaps he will share it with her this year. I thought he'd be generous at the Christmas party, but the bastard didn't go for it. He dragged her under the table and she entertained him while her husband was looking for her. Greedy asshole. More like tucked under his beer belly, he scoffed. I'm amazed she hasn't ended up flat as a pancake by now. Laughter erupted beyond the bathroom stall. I listened to the sound of 2 zippers being pulled up and the door swinging open and shut as they left. Wash your hands, you filthy pigs, I muttered after them. My head was spinning. I imagined what it would feel like to topple sideways and crash through the flimsy ceiling tiles. Part of me wished for it, hoping maybe it would dull the ache inside. Everything was becoming clear now. I'd had my suspicions for a while. A certain shift in her demeanor had set alarm bells ringing. Once suspicion takes hold, it festers and grows. I noticed subtle changes in her clothing, particularly her underwear. She started taking phone calls in another room. Our bedroom activities became erratic, infrequent, then excessively frequent, and then infrequent again. Classic signs. But I had been scouring the wrong social circle for the culprit. Juliet was a stunning woman with long, flowing black hair and curves that could make any head turn. She always dressed immaculately, never sparing any expense on her looks. Juliet never shortchanged herself, that much was certain. I assumed she would seek someone equally impressive, someone who matched her high standards. I felt a twinge of guilt for those thoughts, having never considered that betrayal might come from her. I had been looking at the wrong page in the infidelity playbook. I envisioned her with a handsome, flashy man of substantial prowess, not a small, self-important terrier of a man. It's been over 2 years since that old fool lured her away from me, and I've been grieving ever since. Losing the bond of marriage, even one on its last legs, can be devastating. I wallowed in self-pity for a while, then anger flared up, leading me to consider all sorts of drastic, illegal acts of revenge. Eventually, I shook off the haze of irrational thoughts and began to think more clearly. I spoke with a friend who handed me a couple of small plastic gadgets and explained their use, which I diligently recorded. The following day, armed with my toolkit, I returned to the building to investigate that elusive drip. My process included discreetly inserting the gadgets into unattended laptops and pressing the buttons as per my notes. While the devices did their work, I made noise around the office, whistling loudly and cursing the supposed leak, all to avoid suspicion while I searched. It's always wise to conceal your actions in plain sight. Once done, I retrieved the gadgets and exited whistling. One of the perks of building homes for people is the interesting array of personalities you encounter, and the friendships you can forge through fairness, respect, and a bit of humor. Another friend analyzed the data from the gadgets, leading me on a convoluted path to Mr. Ward, who then introduced me to Miller and Young. Our extended discussion at a bar provided me with the solution, albeit in cryptic hints. Eventually, I tracked down the person I needed to talk to and directly posed my question. She listened, initially appearing sympathetic, but grew concerned when I showed her the data. After outlining my plan, she laughed and gave me what I needed. She managed a substantial pension fund and feared that Acme's current board would tank the stock price, jeopardizing her significant investments. She also connected me with the next key individual. By meticulously explaining the what, how, when, and why of my plan, nearly everyone on my list, hedge funds, pensions, mutual funds, and bank investments, contributed to the solution, each motivated by different reasons. Some saw profit in it, given they now knew the timing. Some shared my disdain for Harry Williams, while others acted out of spite or simply because they were moved by my story. Surprisingly, none leaked the information, keeping it under the radar. In the end, I secured proxies for more than half of the company's shares. I had requested a meeting, and they had granted me an entire day. That day is today. "You're all fired," I declared. "Molly, please notify security to be ready to escort these individuals off the premises once the meeting concludes." A giggle escaped Molly's lips as she made exaggerated googly eyes at me from behind her glasses, swiftly working the phone. Within a minute, security guards appeared, looming outside the boardroom door, ready for their task. The room fell silent, punctuated only by occasional panicked whispers. The savvier assistants had subtly distanced themselves from their bosses, seeking to disassociate themselves now that their benefactors were out of a job. Juliet eyed me as if I might suddenly sprout fangs, and I relished her fear. A little retribution was just the appetizer. The main course was yet to be served. "What's next on the agenda, Mr. Ward?" I asked, fully aware of the agenda, since I had written it myself, but savoring the formality. Item 2 on the agenda: a motion that no golden parachutes be offered to any former members of the Board of Egmont votes in favor. I raised my hand with a broad smile. Votes against. A small forest of hands hesitantly rose. The motion is carried. Okay, last try. I want feeling, rhythm, rhyme, and volume set at 11. Jazz hands wouldn't hurt either. At that, Molly started hiccuping from laughing so hard, and for some strange reason, those high-powered executives did exactly as I asked. I recorded it on my phone for posterity. I then informed them that detailed accounts of their sordid affairs with the assistants and my wife had been sent by couriers to their spouses. Eventually, I told them all to back off. As they scrambled away, shoving each other in their desperate attempt to escape me and the chaos their lives had become, I sighed and sat up. The remaining 3 members of the gang followed the rush in a more composed manner after Young managed to get a dazed Juliet to sign the contract for her CEO position, leaving us almost alone. Molly cupped my chin with her small hand and asked, "Are you all right?" Her low contralto voice sent its usual shivers down my spine, and I nodded in response. "It's almost over," she whispered. "Get your hands off my husband." Juliet's voice snapped me out of my thoughts. She had apparently shaken off her stupor with a vengeance. I stared at my soon-to-be ex-wife in astonishment. What could she possibly be thinking? I had just humiliated and embarrassed her to an extreme degree, nearly pushing myself over the edge as well. Yes, she had wronged me by cheating, but my retaliation had been brutal. Not only did I make a spectacle out of her lovers, but she was now officially written into the records of a public corporation, a document accessible to any shareholder. This meant she would undoubtedly face a barrage of mentions in divorce proceedings and countless lawsuits. And now she had the audacity to get jealous. Was she completely insane? Molly spun around, her usual smile replaced by a steely glare. I could almost hear the metaphorical claws slide out. I had met the beautiful Molly Jones 2 years earlier when I built a charming little cottage for her and her fiancé. It was some of my best work. The exterior was rustic, complete with a thatched roof, picket fence, and a meticulously managed wildflower garden, a perfect blend of chaos and order. Inside, however, was a marvel of modern engineering, featuring Italian ingenuity that allowed almost everything to fold up and disappear into walls and cupboards. Molly, being quite petite, had steps built into the kitchen and other high cupboard areas. These, too, folded and tucked away seamlessly. Half the time, I expected the whole setup to vanish into itself. It was absolutely brilliant. Her fiancé was tragically killed in a senseless road accident caused by a truck wheel that hadn't been properly secured. The wheel flew off at high speed on the motorway, propelled by the truck's heavy load, and bounced improbably high into the air. When it descended, it smashed into the little sports car he was driving on the opposite side of the median. He never had a chance. A split-second difference could have meant safety, either bouncing behind his car or landing in front of it. Instead, it came down right on him. An 18-wheeler's wheel is massive, lethally so. I attended the funeral, and when she had calmed down a bit, I offered to complete the cottage her fiancé had been building at no charge and sell it for her if she wished. Yet, in the throes of her grief, she chose to finish and live in it, turning it into a tribute to her lost love. She dedicated herself to working on the cottage almost daily, navigating her sorrow. Naturally, I was there to assist whenever possible. As time passed, her vision for the cottage evolved. Initially designed as a show house, she decided to transform it into a real home, reflecting the life and comfort they had envisioned together. This led to many discussions, redesigns, improvisations, disagreements, reconciliations, and more redesigns. Over the 6 months it took to perfect the cottage, we became close friends. Not more than that, but certainly no less. She shared her plans of returning to university to complete her degree and embark on a career in medicine, terwijl ik mijn dromen deelt van het kopen van een boot en de wereld over reizen. Thus, when I first suspected Juliet was cheating on me, she was the second person I confided in. Just as I had helped her through her grief, she supported me through mine. She was my shoulder to cry on, my listener for venting anger, and my voice of reason when I had impulses to act rashly. She was always there when I needed her most. Inevitably, as time passed without concrete proof of Juliet's infidelity, my love for Juliet faded and was replaced by deep feelings for Molly. They were polar opposites, making the transition easier for me. Juliet was tall, slim, and exuded sophistication. Molly was short, delightfully curvy, and full of laughter. Juliet had long dark hair and blue eyes. Molly had short blonde hair and brown eyes. Juliet was driven by an insatiable desire to succeed, while Molly lived to enjoy every moment to the fullest. Juliet embodied ambition and ruthlessness. Molly was a warm, reliable companion. While Juliet seemed to pursue any opportunity, even infidelity, Molly remained faithful, with me seemingly the only man in her life after her fiance's death. Juliet was my unfaithful wife, Molly my steadfast friend, my best friend. I was about to ruin everything because I had fallen in love with her. Molly had helped me plan this day. Initially, it was just a fun thought experiment, but gradually, it became a means for me to find closure. I'm not sure Molly ever believed I'd actually follow through, but when the day came, she was resolute in her support. She turned into my de facto secretary for the day. Juliet, however, had misconceptions about the situation. "I've been watching you, rich bitch. I know who you are and where you come from," Juliet screamed. "Do you think you can buy everything? You think you can buy my husband? Well, I've got news for you." She swung at Molly's face, but Molly ducked and kicked her in the shin. Juliet crumpled, clutching her leg. "You bitch," Juliet spat. Better than being a whore, Molly retorted. Seeing that the immediate danger of a full-blown catfight had passed, I stepped in. I had learned my lesson the hard way about getting in between two infuriated women. It only resulted in scars. If they were driven to violence, they could handle it themselves. I would intervene only when they were too exhausted to hurt anyone, including me. Juliet, you've been ruining things for many people for 2 years now. It's over. Please don't say that, Dylan. You love me. I raised my hands in a defensive gesture. No, no, no. That's in past tense. I loved you. Hear that at the end, but you killed that feeling. So now, I don't. Oh, please, she implored. You made me chairman. You gave me the best gift ever. Of course you love me. And I'll never cheat again. Ever. Molly leaned in and whispered to me, I'd give her a week. At most, I had to agree. It doesn't matter if it's tomorrow or never. We are done. We will never, ever be together again. I overheard 2 of your friends talking about how long you've been the company slut. Did you seriously play around with that creep under the table at the Christmas party while I was looking for you? Molly placed her hand on my arm, eyes wide. My God, really? I take back my earlier prediction. Maybe a day, and even then, that's being generous. Oh, come on. You knew I was doing it for my promotion. You didn't mind, Juliet cried, tears streaming down her face. What? I never knew you were cheating until 6 weeks ago. I had my suspicions, but I had no proof. No, you knew. You had to know. You just didn't care. What was I supposed to know? I loved you and trusted you wouldn't be unfaithful. But you never said anything. You didn't care. Back off, Juliet, Molly interjected. That's complete nonsense. You're just trying to make him feel guilty. You were sneaky, sleeping around but careful enough so he'd never catch you. You did it in your own world, one he couldn't easily access. He didn't know anything, and that doesn't make him stupid. It just makes you a really conniving cheater. Says the rich woman who couldn't accept her fiance's death and had to buy a replacement, secondhand even. All those little changes to your perfect house, trying to tie him down with money. Face it. Molly's eyes were filled with tears as she stared at me. I never. That wasn't it. I didn't. You didn't tell him you came from a wealthy family with diamonds and pearls. Why? Were you afraid he'd see the real you? Molly started to turn away, and I knew if she ran, I might lose her forever. I grabbed her hand, pulled her close, and held her tightly. Hey, I whispered as she sobbed against my chest. She's trying to find our weak spot and tear us apart, but it's not going to happen. I don't care about your wealth. You're my best friend. This is classic her. She bends reality to suit her needs. How do you think she always got away with her betrayals? She can make anyone believe her lies. I turned back to Juliet, who smirked with triumph. Juliet, you better shut your mouth now, or your next words will be, do you want fries with that? I gave you that CEO position, but if you don't stay quiet, I will take it back. I'll give it to Molly. She's an excellent organizer. I glanced down at Molly, who, at 5 feet tall, had a look up at me. She stared at me with alarm through her tears. She didn't want that position any more than I did. Juliet finally detected the truth in my tone. She was desperate to keep her chairmanship and knew I held all the proxies for the day. I had the power to reconvene the meeting and change the agenda, potentially removing her and the rest of her team. Why did you give me the position if you despise me? She asked. Juliet, I don't despise you. I did once, but not anymore. I used to love you, but those feelings have faded. Do you want to know why you got the job? Here's the truth. 6 weeks ago, as I was planning this, I envisioned us divorced. If you lost your job, I would be stuck paying you alimony, funding your lifestyle. That idea was unbearable. But if I promoted you, I thought there might be a chance you'd end up supporting me instead. The idea of you working to support my pleasure seemed like justice, especially given my heart condition, which means I can't work anymore. Molly glanced at me with fear in her eyes. I cupped her face in my hands and gently wiped away her tears with my thumbs. I don't actually have a heart condition, but I could easily get a doctor's note saying I do. I have friends in unusual places. She threw her arms around me, sobbing. I'm sorry, she said. her voice muffled against my chest. "But I don't want to be your best friend anymore." Juliet laughed mockingly, but I shot her a venomous look that made her step back. I gestured for her to stay away, and she retreated to the other side of the room. "Really?" I asked Molly. She nodded, and I felt an overwhelming exhaustion wash over me. I was weary of my emotions, constantly riding the tumultuous waves of hope and fear, never quite blending like oil and water. "I'm so sorry," I said softly. "I never intended to fall in love with you. I just wanted you to be my best friend. It just happened. I'm sorry I ruined everything." Molly's eyes were wide and brown, staring up at me. "You fell in love with me?" "Yes, and I'm sorry it damaged our friendship." "You fell in love with me," she repeated. I realized I might have gone too far. Perhaps I should have kept my feelings to myself. I nodded, feeling a mix of misery and loneliness set in. Why did she keep asking? "I don't want to be your best friend," she said thoughtfully. I braced myself for the inevitable rejection. "I want to be your best love, your best life, your best wife. And yes, your best friend too, but those first." Her words took a moment to sink in, and when they did, they filled the void with a radiant hope I hadn't felt in a long time. Huh. I couldn't quite process what she had just said. "Dallin, right, will you marry me?" "Okay, but you have to get on one knee to ask me properly." It wasn't the best joke, but I was too exhausted for anything more clever. She obliged, dropping down to one knee. "Dallin, will you marry me?" "Can't hear you now. Come closer." I attempted a smile, though joking about marriage felt off to me, especially at that moment. She stood up again, and suddenly her arms were around my neck, her legs tightly gripping my waist as she hoisted herself up. I staggered back a few steps. "I'm going to ask you one last time, Dylan. Just once more, and I mean it." "Almost. Maybe. Now listen carefully. I love you, and you said you love me. So will you marry me?" "You're not joking." "No, of course not. Do you think I ask people to marry me as a joke? Why would you think that? I'm not very lucky." "Well, say yes, and I promise you'll get very lucky as soon as I get you back home." "Yes." She kissed me for the first time then, her glasses going askew in the passion of the moment. Everything felt mixed up and out of order, but I didn't care. It tasted like sunshine, roses, vanilla, autumn mists, warm beach sand, and chocolate, like everything wonderful in my otherwise mundane, tangled life. "Ha! I knew it," came a muffled cheer from the far side of the boardroom. "Back off, Juliet, Molly," and I said simultaneously. And she did. Maybe my luck was changing after all. Thank you for watching this video to the end. If you liked it, please like it and subscribe to the channel. See you soon.